Okay, this is the YouTube live stream is up and running. morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining.
Oh, sure thing.
Or just trying to get people in, the fun before the game starts.
Sounds good. Where are you located?
Right now, I'm presently at my home in Duluth.
In Duluth?
Yes.
Ah, just a bit of a non sequitur. My mom, when they came to America from Italy, they all went to Thunder Bay. It was Port Williams, Fort Arthur back then.
Different Duluth, Georgia.
Oh, got it. Got it.
All right. Yep. I'm seeing an issue. We'll check in with you in just a second.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good.
Morning, Jag. We see you. Thank you.
Good.
Good morning, Jag. Suresh here.
Hi, Suresh, how are you?
Doing good. How are you doing today?
Going okay, not bad, good start.
All right. I can see Dr. Phil Wang joining us as well. He's connecting it right now.
Yeah. And Agnihotri is there hiding.
So, Ani, you are on mute right now, I guess. Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ani. Morning, James.
Morning.
Hi, Jim.
Right. Glad to see everybody here.
Yeah.
Right.
Good morning, Dr. Wang.
During the event, if I mute you, please don't take it personally. It just means that we're hearing a background noise, and I need to get that out.
Okay.
Certainly.
Yeah, I can see
Dr. Wang.
Dr. Wang. He's connecting to audio, but it's not yet connected.
Okay, Jim, are we ready to go?
Yes, I just have to take care of failing, and I need to hit start because it is time. So
Yeah.
I'm going to start the webinar now.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Ani Agnihotri. I'm co-founder and CEO of Marshall Automation America, as well as co-chair of US-India Business Summit. And it is my pleasure to welcome you for our program, The Race to Become an AI Superpower, the cases of China, America, and India. This program has been put together by USA India Business Summit, Georgia Tech Cyber, and ICA Institute. My co-chair, Dr. John McIntyre, had a medical situation last night, so he's under observation. He's fine, but he is not going to join us today. So we will proceed as scheduled, with welcome remarks from myself, and then I would invite Suresh in place of John to introduce himself as well as IACA. US India Business Summit has been partnering with Georgia Tech Cyber for last 15 years, and we have our 15th anniversary event on November 20th, 2024 in Historic Academy of Medicine, Georgia Tech. We have done several programs, probably about 100 or so in last 15 years, and we have been spreading our horizons with help from Dr. Sheth, who's our mentor and also guide in terms of choosing the topics. And this year we have actively had honor of having him on the program for last 3 programs, and we look forward to working with Dr. Sheth, Suresh, and ICA for our future events also. It is our endeavor to present a topic of immense importance, not only to us in the US, but all over the world. And if you are in technology, or if you have anything to do with technology, I'm sure that you have crossed path of AI, conversations about AI, its legitimate use, its ethical use, and no other technology has changed the human race as much as AI is likely to do. So with this, it's my honor to welcome Dr. Jack Sheth, who is founder of ICA, and Dr. Sheth is also Charles H. Kalstedt Professor of Business at Emory University. He's Professor of Business and known globally for his scholarly contributions in consumer behavior, relationship marketing, competitive strategy, and geopolitical analysis. Over 50 years of experience, Dr. Sheth, and we fondly call him Jag, is known all over the world and has been teaching in University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Columbia University, MIT, and Emory. Dr. Sheth is a recipient of 2020 Padma Bhushan Award for Literature and Education, one of the highest civilian awards given by Government of India. He is a fellow of Academy of International Business, AIB, the Association of Consumer Research, ACR, the American Psychological Association, APA, and the American Marketing Association, AMA. He is a distinguished fellow of the Academy of Marketing Science, AMS, and International Engineering Consortium. He is recipient of all 4 top awards given by American Marketing Association. Professor Sheth has been advisor to numerous corporations all over the world. He has authored or co-authored more than 300 papers and numerous books. So it's 300 books. Dr. Sheth, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you want Suresh to go or before me to introduce?
Yes, indeed. Suresh, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. This is Suresh Sharma. I know it is hard to fill in the shoes of John, who unfortunately could not make it to moderate this session, but I'll try my best. My background has been industry and business. I've been a close colleague of Dr. Jack Sheth for quite some time and have served on the board of advisors for the India, China, and America Institute for almost 18 years now. In addition to that, I've been participating in the periodic calls with the China Research Center, and the interaction between these 3 huge markets has always intrigued me because they truly have great impact on the rest of the world as well. So if you cover these economies, it has always fascinated me because they do have a bearing on your business too. So with that kind of a backdrop, Dr. Jack Sheth and we have obviously been working on a number of projects together, and we do plan to revive even at a higher level going forward. So it's a great opportunity. Thank you for having me as one of the panelists and moderator. So with that, I would request Dr. Jack Sheth to frame the discussion, I think.
Thank you, Ani. Thank you, Suresh. And I'm so glad, I'm so not glad that John is not with us. John, as you know, is a brilliant scholar, has very insightful questions. he sees exactly where to motivate the speaker to go in that direction and gets more out of the speakers or out of the panel members. So I miss him. Let me set the context. My job is to give overarching macro context, and then within that context, we'll talk about very specific areas as the panel goes through for 2 hours. These 3 countries were chosen for a reason. They are the 3 largest economies in the world if you measure on purchasing power parity, which I measure that I believe very much it is not the income that you earn, but how much is your buying power, which makes all the difference. And there's a well-established index created by both World Bank and IMF, which has been there for about, I don't know how many years, maybe about 18 years. So given that situation, it has become an alternate standard to measuring GDP. And here are the numbers. China is in 2023, last numbers, is already in fact about $35 trillion. Think about that. Somewhere between 32 to 35. US is $25 trillion. And India is about $15 trillion. Used to be about 11 trillion, but it has jumped up as the economy goes more and more transparent from cash to GST-based tax recordings. India's is now from 11 to 15 trillion. And we still believe between the 3 countries, India still has more cash economy, and therefore it is not as reflected in the purchasing power parity total market economy. So, and the rate of growth, China still continues to be about 5% roughly. America would be about 2.5% based upon the forecast. And India is going to be between 6.5% to 7%, both by the Central Bank of India and equally important, the International Monetary Fund. So if you just look at 5 years from now, if everything goes as planned, there are no outside black swan events like the COVID or something like that, it looks like that the US economy on this measure will become number 3. Then there is a huge drop. You have the Japanese economy, but measured in terms of purchasing power parity, is really like $5-6 trillion. German economy is about the same, and everything drops. So this is the rule of 3. 3 dominant nations, 3 dominant companies in an industry, 3 dominant brands, however you look at it, which is why we chose India, China, America, that they may be the defining nations in the future of AI evolution, and maybe AI domination in the process. So that's one thing we need to think. Second thing, and equally important, we have to understand is that the digital age that we live in is very different compared to the industrial age. Economics are very different. And I'll just contrast those two. Of course, there are economics of industrial, agricultural age, which I will not go into that one. In the industrial age, total cost of manufacturing or making is a variable cost and a fixed cost. Even after so much of automation, including robotics in automobile industry, for example, that variable total cost has never increased more than 40% roughly. The largest total cost industry, fixed cost industry is the aircraft manufacturing. Paper mills used to be the big one at one time. So still 60% is a variable cost, which means you buy components, you buy raw materials, whatever you are. In the PC business, think about this one. The value add in a factory is under 11%. 89% is all procurement, out of which, in fact, 2 key components makes all the difference, which is the software, usually by Microsoft, and of course, the hardware, which is a chip by Intel or Intel's competitors. In the industrial age, which is the manufacturing side, we try to maximize profit or surplus, where you have to do the marginal cost theory. What is the marginal cost of the next unit you will produce, and you price it accordingly. So the formula mathematically defined is that you will get an optimal profit when your marginal price incremental quantity you want to sell at a price will equal your marginal cost. That gives you the maximum surplus. Now come to the digital age. The total cost in digital age is predominantly fixed cost. The variable cost is very small. There are only two components in the digital age, hardware and software. To make a chip today, it'll cost you about $3.5 billion, $500 million for the design, and $3 billion to build a wafer factory, basically semiconductor factories of different kind. And so the first copy of the chip is about $3.5 billion. The cost of the next chip is a fraction of a cent. If you build an operating system like the iOS, for example, at Apple, or its counterpart, the Android system, the first copy will cost you slightly more than $1 billion. The upgrades are usually $500 million. So the first copy of the software in a shrink wrap, when you get it, in my days in a CD, when we got it, for example, it'll be again $1 billion. The second cost of that copy is practically zero. So what happens when your total cost is fixed cost? Not when total cost is variable cost and fixed cost. If the marginal cost is zero in fixed cost theory, then should you give it away free? That breaks down traditional economics, which is the main problem. We are still calculating in accounting-wise economic thinking that the industrial age economics will follow into the digital age. So now all of a sudden, marginal cost theory breaks down. Basically, it says that if your marginal cost is zero, which is variable cost, then you should give out the product free. And economists never think about creating an economy on free goods. The answer is yes, you should give it out free and create a massive industry, which is exactly what happened in social media. Whether it's a Facebook, WhatsApp, WeChat, doesn't matter any. Fixed cost is enormous. You increase the number of subscribers without charging them anything. Basically, as you can see, billions and billions of customers joining. WhatsApp, for example, Instagram, for example, Facebook, each one has 2 billion population. They're bigger than nations. This discontinuity between industrial age economics on which policies are created, on which accounting is done by company, on which the investors are looking at their price earnings ratio, etc., in the digital age makes no sense. Which is why you see in S&P 500, the top 7 or 8 companies are all basically non-industrial companies. Values of industrial companies which are giant at one time, such as the General Electric, for example, or Boeing right now, for example, or any large manufacturing company, is very low compared to NVIDIA, compared to the Seven Magnificent, they call it, because it's very different. It's basically light asset theory kind of stuff. There's a reason why I'm pointing this one out, because I'll connect it to ultimately AI in a moment. So who gets the advantage in the digital age? One who can get masses as fast as possible across different activities that they do, and speed is very important. They are looking for 3 economies: economies of scale, which is what industrial economics taught us, but you also need the economy of scope, which means the technology can be nested or used across all sectors of the economy. And most importantly, you need an economy of speed. How fast can you penetrate the market so that the market matures, not in a typical S-shaped curve, slowly rising and then taking off, but it goes in an exponential way. I think it's very important to understand the economics. If you look at this thing, what are the advantages? How can a nation become a dominant nation in the AI technology? Let me make a couple of AI comments before I take it into the advantages India, China, and America has, and who is likely to come out on the top as a forecast. Before I get into that discussion, AI is nothing new. AI has been built into smartphones from the day they were designed. When I type in something, automatically I get, for example, by typing a character, the whole word, I can make the whole sentences, or general chat GPT or Copilot can give me the whole paragraph, the whole, basically a chapter, pretty much I can do it. That's the only difference. It's basically an organizational theory about how to organize the data that you have. From the data, how can you extract it fast? Speed matters for a lot, which is why we get all impressed when I do Copilot research, for example. Within 20 seconds, from this vast data, I get suddenly information that I want. But my platform at home, not only Siri on the one hand, but Amazon platform at home that listens to me all the time, is all AI based. So AI is everywhere. The sudden excitement in AI has more to do with generative AI. What can it do and what are its capabilities? Is it going to substitute human intelligence, not only human manpower? Is it going to surpass the human race even? Will become so smart that it begins not to listen. Frankenstein kind of a model in minds of the people, and you hear so many commentaries on news area. I will not go into that kind of a sensational news, but get into the more reality of the world. So this depends on the economics of the digital age, as I mentioned, and how fast can you raise it. So what are the advantages? There are three things that are very important for a nation. First one is to have a standard. And this is where countries like China are ahead of America. In America, we allow the free market process to fight for standards. I experienced that in the cellular telephone industry evolution as an advisor. We had a CDMA, TDMA, AMPS, and we said, let the standard through free market process come in existence, and we lost it. European Union, on the other hand, decided that there will be a common standard to gain economies of scale and maybe scope to some extent by creating GSM. GSM is an inferior network standard compared to CDMA, for example, or even TDMA. But it was the one that they decided will be the de facto standard by law. What's called de jure standard. We pass a law, and therefore the only standard on which all our network operators have to operate. Today, 90% of all the cell phones are GSM based, on which Android platform is given, as opposed to Sony, which probably has a better standard from a software viewpoint, application viewpoint, but it is tiny compared to the big boy Android. And of course, Samsung dominates in the process as the user of Android. Think about that. So the first key lesson we have to learn is that among these three countries, which has the power to, by mandate, by law, by policy, says this will be the only standard, why go through the fight for standards as we do in a free economy? And this is not the first time America has lost out by building so strongly on capitalism and free economy. We are the inventors of the television. We commercialized the television, and we lost it because there was no common standard about the vacuum tubes. They could not mix with each other. Zenith would have its own suppliers. RCA would have its own suppliers. General Electric would have its own suppliers. The three top brand names in making televisions. They're all gone with one single standard that came from solid state. Japan created a de facto standard by policy.
Dr. Sheikh?
Yeah.
In terms of time, we are at a time where we need to start the second session with Dr. Wang. May I please request you to that we do Q&A after session 1?
Yeah, for me, yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, Suresh, we are now moving to our session 1.
Can I continue? I need to continue. I'm not giving answers yet.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, sir.
So one is that who creates de jure standard versus de facto standard. And America will lose out in that race because we believe so strongly about let the market decide the standards through competition. European Union is the one that is smarter. So, and China has an advantage because they unilaterally can set a standard. Second thing is that you need to deliver large consumer market. Most of the technologies like this in the Western world is starting with the military, then goes to the industrial, and consumer is the last recipient. If you want the volume and the scale and the speed, one has to invent technologies for consumer-facing industries, consumer experience industries, and military comes the last, which is the second main reason why, if you look at the architecture of AI evolution, which is identification of the eye, for example, face recognition and surveillance, that is all consumers. Large databases of millions of people. So China has a second major advantage. Third major advantage is that they're focusing on industries in applying AI, which are all basically based on mass markets. For example, the automotive, autonomous car, very large initiative. Transportation in general, logistics, military is a very small component. US is just the reverse in terms of investment by the government and money, etc. So China has all the three advantages. Now, how can US counterbalance? US cannot do it by itself, is my analysis and my forecast. US does not have population, it's only 400 million people versus 1.23 billion in China. US always believes in let the competition decide the standards, as we have done in cell phones, as we are doing in AI right now. Each one of entrepreneurs tries to do, there'll be a shakeout, etc. Loses a lot of time. In a democracy, you always have to have arguments going on, huge lobbying pressure. It delays in creating a standard also.
Yeah.
So what is the solution? Nani, give me about 5 minutes, please. What's the solution? Mm-hmm. The solution is that US has to align with a large consumer market. And that turns out to be India. US will need India very badly if it wants to win the race against China. To equalize the size, the economies of scale, more consumer facing. And by the way, India did the same thing, unilaterally creating a standard for UPI for all of the credit card guys and payment online, the PayPal type people. They were all fighting for their own shares, segmenting the market. They decided to create a UPI platform by the government. Similarly, Aadhaar, which is a recognition of ID recognition platform. We don't do that. Our social security identification is so backward because our thinking has been military first, industrial second, consumer last. So we are way behind. So the alignment is very important for one reason, having access to a large market. If China can race ahead, then the only way US can manage and may become competitive or equal would be US and India combined together, some form of a industrial policy, technology policy. One more area. India has a talent. US just does not have enough talent. If you compare Chinese, and Chinese goal is actually to create a talent economy, which is producing thousands, if not millions of people will be experts in AI. Right. We don't have anything like that as a national level, for example. So our policy, the processes, which is a democratic process, give and take, the lobbying aspect, each company fighting for their own self-interest, basically keeps the country way behind. So usually in this triangle between China, India, America, which is the institute that we actually talk about, India, China, America Institute, there is an alignment necessity between India and America to counterbalance the Chinese, not from a military viewpoint, but strictly on day-to-day life, consumer markets, AI orientation. I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sheth. Very illuminating remarks. We will take up in the question and session. With this, I welcome Dr. Wang. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. So you're able to hear us.
Yes.
We're delighted to have you back in our program, Dr. Wang. And Dr. Wang is a professor at Samnan School of International Affairs in Georgia Institute of Technology, and also known as Phil. He has a PhD from University of Pennsylvania, and his research interests are comparative and international political economy, U.S.-East Asian relations, and East Asia and China studies. Dr. Wang has published 9 books, 2 co-edited in 2 languages, including Organization Through Division and Exclusion, China is Hukou System, Stanford University, and the China Trilogy that includes the China Order, Centralia, World Empire, and the Nature of Chinese Power, the China Record, an assessment of People's Republic, and the China Race, Global Competition for Alternative World Order. He has also published dozens of books, chapters, journals in 4 languages, including op-eds in newspapers like New York Times and Christian Science Monitor. Dr. Wang has taught at the U.S. Military Academy, West Point, and U.S. Air Force Academy, and held visiting and adjunct honorary positions in institutions like European Institute in Italy, Sciences Po in France, National Sun Yat-sen University and National Taiwan University in Taiwan, National University in Singapore, Renmin University in Anhai Normal University in China, University of Macau, University of Tokyo, and so on and so forth. Dr. Wang, it's indeed our delight to have you as a speaker in this program. And with this, I would request you to begin with your remarks.
Okay, thank you so much, Annie. And it's great to see you, Jack, and everybody. It's nice to be back. Yeah, I have prepared a few slides. And good morning, everybody. I have prepared a few slides. So if you don't mind, I'm going to try to play with the technology. As Jack was mentioning, AI is everywhere, but my intelligence is not that high with technology here. So let me try to share with you my slide. If you tell me if you can see it. Can you see it? Or if you're not, let me know. Can you?
We can. We can.
Oh, great. All right. So yeah, I have prepared a few slides here. So hopefully will help me to make a very quick, short report about what I see as what's going on between US and China in particular, because I don't know really that much of India. Last time I've been to India was over 10 years ago. I would love to go anytime, if it's possible. So if you guys in the audience have any opportunities, let me know. I'd be more than happy to go there, even though I'm still a kind of honorary adjunct faculty in a couple of Indian institutions, but I haven't been there in person for a long time. Anyway, to cut it short, let me first report to you what I see as what's going on between the 2 countries across the Pacific. I'm going to make a few claims, and I'm going to share with you what I see as the current AI competition between the 2 countries. And then finally, I will conclude with a very quick personal assessment of what I see as the competition for being number 1 in the AI area and beyond. First, let me make a quick claim about the relationship between US and China. One, I don't see any fundamental conflicts between the 2 peoples. The Americans and the Chinese people, they don't really have any kind of unresolvable conflict between them. Their economic interactions are highly complementary, in my humble opinion. Of course, Jack and others are expert on this one. But I think in terms of trade patterns and what they produce and so on, the 2 actually are highly complementary. But there are some other problems, as I will share with you on the next slide. And finally, in terms of the positive aspect of the Sino-American relations, I would say there's also great potential for US and China to work together to have a better world, so to speak, right? But of course, there are problems as well between the 2 countries, the number 1, number 2 economies in the world. I call it PRC USA rivalry. This rivalry, unfortunately, is increasingly become a near zero sum, or if not complete zero sum game just yet, right? Most importantly, at stake is the political survival of 2 competing political systems, the PRC political system and the American way of life, right? And this kind of competition, many say, is already zero sum, but I seem to be thinking maybe not just yet, right? And one thing is quite clear is both sides are fully aware the importance of a material power or technological capabilities in this kind of rivalry. So therefore, AI and anything that is new would necessarily feature prominently in the USA PRC rivalry, right? Anything from EV to AI to new tech, energy, quantum computing, anything you can think of, right? So the US and China, in other words, are necessarily going to be locked into a competition to see who is better in the AI pursuit, right? I also significantly consider there's a possibility for the United States and China to work together to transform the zero-sum or near zero-sum competition into something positive stuff, right? I'm kind of optimistic or cautiously optimistic. It is possible to transform the whole game, but it requires a great undertaking of many things that we may not really see happening. But that's another story. And so this is like a kind of a overall backdrop, if you will, about the AR competition between the two countries, right? All right. So in terms of for the humanity, if you will, for the whole world, if you will, in terms of a human pursuit in the advancement of applying AI and other new technology, I think cooperation is always the key to have a possibly win-win race. But unfortunately, because of political division and the near zero-sum nature between US and China, and this competition does carry a lot of negative consequences. In other words, both sides will try to overpower the other, and both sides may harbor a secret or not so secret desire to undermine the other. So we'll see. My very quick kind of observation is that in terms of competition to become number one in AI, China is clearly still behind the United States, clearly for a number of reasons. I think that we probably all know China is quite behind still in many key areas of technological innovation. AI is just one of those, right? But China is making ground very quickly, ascending very quickly, right? Trying to catch up. So in the next few minutes, I will share with you my kind of a rudimentary understanding of the AI competition between US and China. And I look forward to your comments and questions, right? So first thing first, this is a one way to look at where the AI researchers are located, where they are currently working on AI and related development, right? So the so-called elite AI researchers I found to be working primarily in the United States. But the share of US AI, top AI researchers is shrinking somewhat, as you can see from 2019 to 2022, from 65% to now 57%. And China is catching up significantly over the years, right? In terms of top AI researchers. I don't want to bore you with the criteria on what is meant by being top AI researchers, but basically, this is a kind of one indicator to suggest where they are in this overall competition right now. But it's kind of interesting. Not only Chinese are catching up in having top AI researchers, China is probably doing more in terms of producing AI talent. As you can see, the Chinese share of producing the so-called elite AI researchers has increased significantly from 2019 to 2022. As Jack alluded to, that China has a lot of people, true, but a lot of people does not necessarily mean they're going to produce a lot of talents, right? But in this particular area, because of focused government investment and government policy subsidies and encouragement, the Chinese graduation of STEM students and AI in particular has been growing rapidly, right? So that's one picture. But compare this picture, and with this picture, this picture, and this picture, and this picture. Oh, sorry. This picture and this picture. What we can draw in terms of observation is that even though China produces 26% of the world's top AI researchers in 2022, but only has 12% of top AI researchers in the world, which means that many Chinese top AI researchers, once they are produced or graduate from college, they go abroad. They study in the United States or work in the United States. So the United States actually is gaining quite a bit from the Chinese talents. That's quite interesting. That depicts the kind of a unique characteristic of the PRC USA competition in AI. That is, you may produce lots of talents, but they are working for me. That's quite interesting, right? Now, another way to look at the Chinese competition with the United States in terms of AI research is this. As you can see from these two diagrams here, that the Chinese institutions, AI research institutions, are making great gaining in terms of global ranking. The so-called top 25 institutions in AI research, Chinese institutions, for example, the famous Tsinghua University and the Peking University are making grants quite rapidly, ascending rapidly in the ranking here, right? And that suggests the Chinese government R&D investment is working. Those institutions are producing increasingly more patents, results, papers on AI and so on, right? So that's kind of Chinese are catching up. But according to the most recent, this picture, of course, is more striking in the Asian Pacific region. As you can see, Chinese institutions enjoy a dominant position in terms of AI research in the Asian Pacific realm, right? Basically, other than Singapore and Korea, and they're basically very few other institutions are ranked top on this list. But even with that, according to the one of the most recent RAND reports, that, quote, the Chinese AI technology is still at least 10 to 15 years behind that in the United States, unquote. If that's the case, though, then maybe there's other ways in which we can assess the competition better, right? In addition to just the raw numbers of talent and publications, right? So this is the kind of a way for us to see where United States stands versus the PRC in terms of the future of AI competition, right? As you can see, unlike China and most other countries, many American educated AI top talents with PhD degrees or equivalent tend to stay in the United States, right? Even though the share is shrinking somewhat, but it's still dominant kind of a share, stay here, which of course gives the United States a great potential to stay in the lead for a while, for some time to come, right? It's kind of comforting from US point of view. But moreover, let's try to have assessment of the Chinese innovation capability in AI and elsewhere. As you can see, there are 4 diagrams here. They both suggesting that China is making great progress in terms of output of research and patent registration and so on, especially in telecommunication and the computing related area that of course include AI. So you can see China is making great progress, surpassing everybody in terms of, for example, patent registration, right? I'm not going to bore you too much with some other data suggesting China also produced more STEM students, producing more research papers, and so on in recent years, right? So in other words, quantitatively speaking, it's quite clear China is making great strides ahead and beating the United States and just about every other country, including the European Union together, right? In terms of sheer numbers of output of technology, new technology that is, and research, right? Very impressive. So if we look at these 4 diagrams, we probably cannot help but arriving at the conclusion that the future is China's, and China is leading the world. There's no way to escape that conclusion by looking at those numbers, right? The patent registration is especially impressive. Chinese have made great leap forward, if you will, a great jump in terms of quantity of patents. Now, but let me show you finally the other aspect of the Chinese capability, the so-called meaning of Chinese patents, right? And here's a number that is a little bit old, 2016, because that's the only one we have. We don't have the latest data on this one. I mean, I don't have the latest data on this one. Maybe some of you do. Based on our data, and here's a number. The United States in 2016 has about 20% of the world total patent applications, right? Which is kind of significant. But compared to 40% of that, the Chinese is, of course, losing the game. But then the patent income or revenue, in other words, the authorized use of patent generated income revenue, the US patents generate about $1 trillion USD in terms of value, whereas the Chinese patents, twice as many as Americans, generate almost nothing in terms compared to the United States, only 1.2 billion, right? That's 0.1% basically, right? What does it mean is, according to a Chinese own assessment, quote, 90% of our patents are trash, right? Quote unquote. That's a Chinese own assessment. So in other words, maybe we shall not just judge the competition or rivalry by sheer numbers, the raw numbers of talents, papers, patents. We also have to look at how good those talents are, how much they can release their creative talents, and how innovative they can be, and finally, how much new value they can add to the development of AI. So qualitative analysis probably is quite critical in this regard. And if you want to know why the Chinese are so fond of making numbers big, impressive, well, that's another long lecture we have to do some other time. But here, just take it maybe from this quick observation that United States is by no means losing the competition just yet. So with that, I stop here and look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I have a quick question here, which is, I'm sure, at the top of the mind of everyone. Right in the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned about plus some competition. How do you define plus some competition at the highest possible level of the government? What is happening? What is the dialogue going on between the United States and China?
You mean become a positive sum game?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, what I see is the PRC USA rivalry is indeed near zero sum right now, politically speaking, if not complete zero sum right now, right? But it is possible still to turn it into a new positive sum competition in the sense, yes, there will be real competition between the two countries, but not to the extent we want to sort of undermine, destroy the other, right? And that would be what I see as a positive sum game, right? Or at least not a zero sum, right? In order to do that, a few, as I mentioned earlier, a few critical things have to take place. And most of them are political in nature. And by political, I mean domestic political system and also foreign policy, a foreign strategy, right? And more importantly, I have to submit for you to consider that it is not the United States sort of burden to do that. It's actually Chinese burden to do that, right? Because I do not see a slight chance for the United States, so to speak, to surrender without a fight. I do see the possibility for the Chinese government to make major changes without necessarily a fight. Why? Because I think the gap between U.S. government and American people in terms of interest is very small. And the gap between Chinese government and Chinese people in terms of their different interests is very large.
Right.
So in other words, the Chinese government could make an adjustment to line up with the Chinese people's interests more. As I mentioned a little earlier at the beginning, and the conflict between U.S. and China will be minimized.
Right.
Ani, can we remove the presentation so we can see each other?
Yeah. Yeah, Dr. Wang, if you could please close your presentation.
So what? To close my presentation?
Yeah, if you could. And Suresh?
Oh, stop sharing. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Suresh, are you there? Hello, Suresh.
Yes, Annie, I can hear you.
All right. With this, I would request you to introduce Sanjeet.
Sure. First of all, Dr. Wang, I think that was a great presentation. Very insightful.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that.
And we will have some questions towards the end of the session.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let me take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Sanjeet Singh Down. He's from Silicon Valley, and I have known him for some time. A very successful venture capitalist, a corporate executive, board member, speaker, and a writer in the Valley area for more than 20 years. Sanjeet is currently the co-founder and chairman of You First Capital, which has invested in more than 25 category leading companies such as Anthropic. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. Very much one of the known players in the AI field. Cohere, SpaceX, another very well-known technology company. Unifone, Pensando, and DevRel. Prior to that, he was Intel Capital, where he led venture capital investments in the enterprise software. Sanjeet is also on the Advisory Council for the United Nations World Artificial Intelligence Organization. He has served on the University of California President's Innovation Council. He is an invited speaker at several top conferences, for example, Surge, Web Summit, Venture Summit, and of course, TICON. With this, let me welcome Sanjeet to the panel discussion. Sanjeet, would love to have and share your views on the topic today.
Thank you. Thank you, Suresh, for inviting me. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you, Ani, Jagdish, Dr. Chang. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sanjeet, and I've been in Silicon Valley for over 2 decades. And as Suresh mentioned, I co-run a venture capital firm called You First Capital, and we invest primarily in artificial intelligence companies, mainly in the US. We also keep an eye on what is happening in the Indian innovation ecosystem, especially on AI, as you can imagine. So I can share my views on AI. I think when we talk about AI, we also have to talk about data. So I'll try to give you some complementary views, complementary to the presentation you just saw, which was excellent, I thought, as well. There are, I feel, 3, maybe 4 major data aggregation centers coming up in the world. And one is US, second is Western Europe, thanks to their GDPR and other data regulations. Third is China, which is a walled garden in terms of data aggregation. As far as India is concerned, there is a push towards data aggregation and keeping data within the Indian framework, Indian boundaries. But today, a lot of the digitization is happening via US companies like Google, Meta, etc. So a lot of that data is being siphoned off to the US. So effectively, there are 3 data aggregation centers, US, Western Europe, and China. And if you look at the development of AI, you do need a lot of training data to start with. If you look at any of the generative AI companies that have built large language models, they spent a few years training the model with the right data set. So data forms the backbone of AI. And with that, with my statement around the data aggregation centers that I just talked about, the question then becomes is who is going to build the right AI tool and an effective AI tool using their data set. So US is clearly in the leading position. And I don't think that's going to change at a global level. And I think that will only continue to grow in terms of leadership. There are several LLM companies that have been built here and are doing very well already. And I expect to see an explosion of artificial intelligence startups. Some of them could be growing even bigger to a bigger level than what we see the AI companies today. So I think the position of US remains well entrenched. As far as Western Europe is concerned, there are companies like Mistral AI that are coming out of Europe and building a European-centered AI platform. And I think you will start to see some geographical AI excellence coming up, and they will have the advantage of local European data. By local, I mean mainly Western Europe. But beyond that, you also need the right AI talent, the PhDs in AI and data scientists, etc., to be able to build the models beyond the data. So that's where Europe does have some of that talent, but it's not up there compared to the US. As far as India is concerned, I think I talked about the data aggregation part, but there is a lot of good talent on software development in India that has been cultivated in the last decade. So I'm hopeful that we will start to see AI companies, especially for Indian local needs. I'm seeing trends where the venture capitalists in India are pushing the startup ecosystem to create solutions for grassroots improvement in India. How can AI be used in tier 2 and tier 3 towns of India, not just in the metro cities? And I think you will see some startups coming up, maybe in education, maybe in commerce, but they will all be AI startups. I do expect to see some good success stories that will solve the Indian regional problems and help with upliftment of the common man, especially think of the villager or think of the farmer, think of people who may not have access to clean water every day. So I think their lives can be positively impacted by AI solutions. So I do see that as a trend coming up in India and also a big opportunity for the startup and VC ecosystem in India. As far as India creating AI startups at a global level is concerned, I think that will take time. You need a lot of good, not just AI talent or data science talent, you also need enterprise product development talent. Even if you are building consumer applications, you need pretty strong enterprise talent. And I think that exists only to some extent in India. That still needs to be cultivated. We have seen a handful of companies coming out of India, but not too many. And I'm not an expert on China, so I'll keep it brief. I think China, we should expect, will develop its own AI solutions using its walled garden AI data, walled garden data set. And I think they already have good internet scale companies for search like Baidu, WeChat, etc. All of these platforms. So you can expect that these existing large internet companies in China will usher themselves into the AI era. They will have the advantage of large scale of data that they already have. So I think in terms of who is winning the race, I think US is clearly the leader and will continue to remain so in the future as well. So I will pause here and see if there are any questions on my remarks.
Right. Thank you, Sanjeet. Dr. Wang, you are with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, great. So I have a question to both of you to kickstart the discussion. We have about 14 minutes for this session. Uh, what can US do to accelerate the startup culture in AI technologies? And please keep in mind that most of the common men, people like myself who are not experts in this area, are hearing stories about use of AI for military purposes or for creating a robotic army or having a stealth weapons undersea or in the space, that kind of conversation, and what US is planning to compete with or to stay a leader in that area.
Well, I would say Sanjay is an expert on that, but I will take a first crack on the military application. I think it's only fair game for the countries to think about the military usage of AI technology. Why not, right? To use robot soldiers on the battleground would be less bloody than use real soldiers. So what's wrong with that? So I would say it's a fair game. So we should not blame the Chinese, for example, for considering using AI technology in military arena. And Americans just should have to do the same. If not, you're naive, right? And I would say India should also consider doing the same thing. It's an international competition. If you have this cool technology, use it, especially when it seems to be having the promise of not killing so many real people to win a battle. So what's wrong with that? So with that said, I will stop and yield my ground to Sanjeev, who is an expert on startups.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Over the years, we have always seen a strong collaboration between the startups in the US and the US government arms, and whether it is on military side, army side, navy side, etc. We have seen a strong collaboration. I would also like to point out there is a venture capital fund based in Silicon Valley called InQtel. You can Google it, INQTEL. That it's public on their website. They are funded by, I think, the three-letter agencies of U.S. government, and their mission is simple. Their mission is to scout for startups and help the three-letter agencies in the US. But beyond InQtel, in general, we have also seen a lot of startups selling into US Army, for example. It reminds me of a startup that I had invested in a while ago that created the best fit clothing for the military personnel. That's a big problem. How you cannot just give them standard L, XL, and so on sized clothing. If they feel uncomfortable, how will they do their job correctly? Similarly, the use of AI in military in general is only going to grow. In fact, you can already foresee drone to drone fights. That's, I think, inevitable and going to happen. But beyond that, also use of AI for intelligent solutions as well will grow as well. So I see a lot of collaboration here between military side in the US and the innovation economy of US.
Thank you. Suresh?
So my question is for both the panelists, if you can maybe share your views on the intersection of AI applications and its very tight correlation with cybersecurity, which in turn means our public infrastructure, which impacts common day-to-day living whether it is water distribution or utilities or transportation. Where does that intersection uh, becomes maybe dangerous, or where those applications need some more attention and need some more work to find the right kind of solutions which can be deployed by very, very, I would say, under-trained workforce that we have today.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I can start. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think AI needs to be trained with some guardrails in place. And the private markets need to be very careful and responsible in the development of AI. And I'll almost say, instead of talking about AI, we should talk about responsible AI as the core theme here. And it's not just for startups. It is also applicable to large corporations like Meta, Google, as well as Amazon, Microsoft, etc. So I think they have to be self-responsible and not wait for government to create regulations on development of responsible AI. So that is one aspect. Otherwise, AI can go into dangerous territories like you alluded to, Suresh. And in fact, AI can be used very positively for cybersecurity applications. And and for applications to prevent crime, to detect any issues early on, and help with loss of human life as well.
Yeah, I can't agree more with what Sanjay just said. We need guardrails, we need guidance. And after all, AI, just like any other new technology, which I think, I'm a non-expert, but I consider AI just another new technology, not a replacement of human intelligence, which I think most experts probably would say that AI has yet to replace the human thinking yet. It's called artificial intelligence, and maybe a little exaggeration. But anyway, I think we need guardrails for this new technology to be used safely and positively rather than negatively. But I would not be losing too much sleep over the possibility that some people will use AI to do negative things, to disrupt power supply, water supply, causing damages to this and that. It will happen. There will be people like that. But I think both the US and Chinese and the Indian governments, all of them, are smart enough to see that. They probably should try to stay ahead of the game. Try to institute some kind of guardrails and the principles and policies. On that, I'm going to make a final comment on that one is that, for example, the Indian government has appeared to be most decisive in trying to regulate the use of foreign invented IT technology. For example, Indian government has categorically banned Chinese IT hardware and software, the only one. The Americans, the British, and so on are talking about it. It takes forever to the United States to even do anything about, for example, TikTok or WeChat, as U.S. government promised many years ago, right? But Indian government, no nonsense, just go ahead and ban them, and they ban hundreds of them, right? That appears that New Delhi seems to be much more decisive. But is that really good for the Indian IT industry or Indian consumers? Debatable. I don't know. But at least I would say political power in this regard can still play a very important role.
Right, right. So, Dr. Sheth, I have a question to you. Dr. Sheth?
Yes.
Okay, clearly among these three powers, world's largest economies, as you mentioned, US, China, and India, US and China seem to be number 1 and 2 in the world of AI. How do you think, if you were to advise government of India, which you do, how would you advise government of India to collaborate and create a competition, which Dr. Wang alluded to earlier, positive, some control? How do we go? What role India can play to come up with shaping, responsible AI, as Sanjeet said?
Three things. First one is to immediately expand 15, 20 standalone institutes totally focused on AI education, including responsible AI as a component. Very similar to what we did in IITs, Indian Institute of Technology and Engineering, or AIMS, as we did in medical school. And we generated enormous amount of talent for not only India, but for the world. So I would invest in those.
Dr. Sheikh? Dr. Sheikh?
Yeah, we lost his signal. I think he's speaking, but
Yeah.
The second recommendation is that many initiatives in India.
Dr. Sheikh, sorry to interrupt you. We lost you for about 7 seconds before.
So my first recommendation is to create Indian Institute of AI in a very large scale, as many as each of the states, for example, 20 to 30, all focused on AI. Graduates go just to study AI, including responsible AI, whatever it turns out to be, not just limited to technical side, but managerial side, etc. It's very possible to design a curriculum which people can graduate in 2 years as they do in computer science. That's one. Second recommendation in India, what works is India investing in infrastructure themselves, as they do in roads and railways. UPI is a great example. Credit card companies were fighting for their own share. Everybody had self-interest as a private sector enterprises. UPI comes out of nowhere, integrates all of them, the interface, for example, a payment, and today UPI has become the de facto standard. I think the private sector is not the place to create de facto standards in India. Government has to step in and create a common standard for AI, protocol, language, whatever it is, database management. I think Professor Wang's view about database and then our friend's view. India has very large database. Aadhaar is one of the largest databases. One can use a lot. So second recommendation is that India should have national policy about what AI standards are all about. Indian market is big enough to justify its own standards and can become global. That will be my second recommendation. Third recommendation, as always, is in defense partnership, private-public sector partnership. Any infrastructure project, and to me, AI is an infrastructure industry. Any infrastructure project, you need to get a private companies partnering with the government.
Right.
And so those three would be my recommendation to the Indian government.
Thank you. Sanjeev?
Nani, I have a follow-up question, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. We are 2 minutes short of the next session.
Yes,
So
sure. So this is a follow-up of what Sanjeev alluded to, responsible AI. Obviously, my question to the panel is, what are the existing channels of communication between the three countries that may be possibly working on it or collaborating, or maybe it is not happening? And if that has to happen, then there are two pronged questions that arise. One is it would obviously lead to data sharing, because you would have to train the responsible AI to a wider pool of data, hopefully. And in addition to that, does it come at the expense of innovation? Because if you make it responsible, then you do put guardrails, but then some people would say, hey, you're controlling my freedom to innovate or invent new things. Any comments would be appreciated.
I think there is one trend that is already happening. A lot of the technology startups in the US have an engineering team in India.
Yeah.
And that is a very healthy collaboration at a national level as well between US and India. It is not something that governments are driving per se as a structural collaboration, but I think it is happening inevitably because of the talent and cost structure benefits that India provides. One example I will give you, we are investors in a company called DevRev. They have I think, over 150 engineering resources based in India out of 200 or so employees total.
Right.
And this is a company based in Palo Alto, headquartered in Palo Alto, led by CEO Dheeraj Pandey and Manoj Agrawal both were at Nutanix earlier, which is a $14 billion publicly traded company now. So that is one point of collaboration. I think it's harder, it has become harder for US startups to do a similar framework with China, but it is very streamlined between US and India.
Yeah.
And that will help nurture the right talent in India as well for AI and enterprise software.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. We really appreciate your remarks. Clearly, we don't have enough time. And right towards the end, Sanjeet and Suresh have introduced responsible AI. So we have to now have a next session on responsible AI in our next 2025 version of this program. With this, I want to thank Sanjeet, Dr. Wang, Dr. Sheth for joining us and move to our second session of the day, which
Likewise.
is, yeah, Dr. Desai, Professor Desai.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, sir?
Very well. Let's get going. We have people who are waiting.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. This is your first, participation in UIBS and Georgia Tech Global Business Forum. We really appreciate it. And let me briefly introduce you to the audience. Professor Desai is a Sue and John Staten Professor of Business Law and Ethics at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's Scheller College of Business, and Area Coordinator of Law and Ethics, Associate Director of Law, Policy, Ethics, Machine Learning Center at Georgia Tech. Professor Desai has been in this area for almost 20 years. He's been a visiting fellow at Princeton University Center for Information Technology Policy. Professor Desai scholarship examines how business interests, new technology, especially computer science-driven technology and economic theories shape privacy, technology, competition, and intellectual property law, and where those arguments explain productivity or where they fail to capture society's interest in the freedom and development. So that clearly brings us to what we just concluded in the first session with responsible AI.
Absolutely.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. And so maybe we'll do a deeper, full-blown session of people, but I just try to orient people a little on some things that are sort of obvious, but maybe not. One, as everyone said, this is not actually novel technology, and yet the race, not only to develop it, but the speed at which government has jumped in is, I think, rather amazing, right? So just from a US perspective, NIST has a risk management framework. The White House under the Biden administration has two big statements, a blueprint of Bill of Rights, as well as an executive order demanding that all agencies in the US government understand how they're going to possibly use AI. The Federal Trade Commission is continuing to flex its powers over technology companies and trying to include itself as an AI enforcer of sorts, especially as it relates to privacy, but more broadly as well. Our Equal Opportunity Employment Commission has very specific laws and statements now about whether any industry can use this sort of software as part of its employment practices. The copyright and patent offices, as well as some of the trademark, but mainly copyright and patent, are struggling to understand what on earth do we do with this new technology, which I think many people, but especially I think Dr. Sheth's statements about the key difference here is the notion of economic scarcity is not functional as well as what I take away from my perspective in writing on this area. So it's causing a lot of issues. Also, interestingly to me, especially, is always California. California jumped on emulating the EU's view of GDPR to an extent, and now recently, just this summer, had 7 proposed statutes to regulate artificial intelligence. 4 of them passed. One of them had to just generally look at large models. Another one that passed looked at, well, what data sets did you use and what synthetic data? Another one defined AI broadly as engineered machine-based system, varies in its level of autonomy, and can, for explicit or implicit objectives, infer from the input it receives, how to generate outputs that can influence physical or virtual environments. Now, I think this panel knows, and hopefully our audience knows, that's almost any software. It's so broad to be almost absurd. And another one calls, there's a Transparency Act that suggests somehow you have to detect whether an AI tool was used. So my perspective here is, why on earth is everyone losing their mind? Or at least really feeling we have to get into it. And that we, even as this group, say, oh, what's responsible AI? And I think this stems from some of the themes in the last session, which have to do with the notion of scale, right? The quickness at which these companies want to move to achieve a dominance one way or the other as possibly an infrastructural platform via standards or just network effects is part of the issue. And that history, when we think about it this way, from law and ethics standpoint, a classic way to think about it then is for building trust. We're thinking about legal issues, social, political, and commercial all at once, four. And in the recent history, as I think most people know, the problems of the fact that data is the backend to almost all of these, and that has clashed with privacy, and that there have been seriously silly or arguably not very smart thoughtfulness problems. In other words, issues with how Google and Facebook have used their dominance or privileged position to do some interesting research, but not necessarily think about that they're no longer in a lab, has fueled a history of problems here. So the new frontier will be, for better or worse, AI and really machine learning. So another way to think about this is everyone knows the term big data as my first year students would say that term is over. But what's the new term? It's AI. And some of us are probably old enough to remember the dot-com bubble. And if you remember, there was an ad that it used to be, I don't remember the company, but it loved to sing in the ad, .com. And that was the era of, oh, put something on a napkin in Silicon Valley. And perhaps our previous panelists who had capital, with no offense, would say, yeah, that's interesting. Here's $10 million. And that right now, everything is allegedly AI, which means possibly nothing is actually AI. But more deeply, the promised claims of innovation that we've been seeing for a decade out of Silicon Valley are empty. They absolutely are. Facebook got caught, right? It was, oh, well, we shared your data with Spotify and Netflix. And what did you get? You got better ads. That's all they were really doing. Oh, we recommended this, that, and the other. Did you really do anything that society thought this was such a big benefit that we care less about your dignity and your data and how it operates and where it comes from? Google has done this on occasion. It's Street View and otherwise. Those were a little less thoughtful. It was, no offense to the engineers in the audience, oh, but it's cool and we could gather it. And they were not talking properly. Something broke down, as far as I can tell, between the developers and good product counsel. Someone was being lost there. So those problems stack up. Now, if we throw in very difficult other issues, think about the fact that all of this software is that goes into autonomous vehicles and other things. We go back to this definition. There is a concern, right? These machines and the software that goes with them do have a certain amount of robotic power. But are these concerns actually new? No. The history of society is always about power and fear. And a decade ago, when it came to software, there was one professor, Sandvik, said virtually any piece of software might need scrutiny. And another friend and colleague with whom I tend to disagree, but is a very smart guy, Professor Frank Pasquale, wrote a book that got some attention, The Black Box Society. And he said, we must be able to look under the hood of this technology. So if you think about now, the most recent stuff with OpenAI, I think being the most overt case study, as it were, of mistakes, or also examples of the industry, let's think about how all of these large LLM-driven companies, right? Large language models are behind it. What do they call a mistake? Oh, it's a hallucination. That's a euphemism. It's not a hallucination. It's an absolute error. And they're saying, but trust the system. That's just a little mistake. Don't worry about it. Well, that's a great way to make people freak out and regulate you, right? So in simplest terms, the era of deference to technological disruption is over, right? And I think smart people are saying, okay, so you had a very interesting chat interface. I don't care. What's actually going on? How was it built? What are these outputs? So let's step back. I agree with most of the last panel. This is not actually new. In fact, I beg people, even though it's a failing argument, for your own sake, don't think of the word AI or ML or algorithms. It's software. That's it. And when we step back and say it's software, so many things the last panel said, I think are easier for us to grab, right? It's a cybersecurity question. Oh yeah, absolutely. How does software and cybersecurity work? Oh, we want to know where the bugs are. We want to know this. Now we have a vocabulary to talk as business people, as people who think about regulation or what guardrails might look like, to go to actually smart computer scientists and say, listen, here's a problem. On your technical terms, how do you engineer this? How do you build this to deal with that discrete problem? Instead of some of these ridiculously broad claims of, oh, try not to be bad about what you did with your software. But nonetheless, just as a history, some of you may know, we're still operating under some fascinating goals from I think it was 56, and the Dartmouth Conference, right? Yeah. They simply said, well, we're looking for a type of intelligence. And by the way, they didn't want the term artificial intelligence. They looked for genuine intelligence, but apparently openly admitted, artificial kind of stuck, and we went with it. Notice genuine intelligence, not artificial general intelligence, which is another red herring. But if you look closely, we're still doing good and new research on these areas, right? They thought about, in 1956, neuron nets, the notion of machine learning and self-improvement, using language as a benchmark about whether the machine hit some level of genuine intelligence. And the notion of randomness and creativity. Can the machine start to do something in the way that a human might be able to generate novel things? That's from 1956. So when you think about that, that's the core of what spawned the latest boom. Because in natural language processing and LLMs, a few groups, as the last session pointed out, coughed up some really interesting papers. Google launches the Transformer paper, and it's a huge breakthrough for LLMs and how they work. And roughly, while there are many players, I don't mean to insult any scientists who are doing so much work here, OpenAI grabs that and runs with it a little faster than anyone seems to otherwise, right? So they take the notion of transformers and attention, and they launch GPT-1. And what do? They publish a paper. Interesting to the last panel, right? The industry publishes the paper because they have so many of the great researchers that the carrot is come play in a private sandbox and you'll have more data and more money. And so they do that. But then comes GPT-2, right? So the actual stakes and payoffs change quite a bit when you get to that. The cost for the early OpenAI cloud computing costs alone were 8 million, 25% of its expenses at that point. But that's how they developed GPT-2. So they jumped to 8 million web pages, 1.5 billion parameters, as opposed to 117 million parameters, right? So these are orders of magnitude. So these are huge things because they publish the paper and they say, wow. And in technical slight gibberish, if you don't read the area, and I always have trouble learning it because I am not a computer scientist, the diversity of tasks the model was able to perform in zero-shot settings suggests high-capacity models can maximize likelihood of sufficiently varied text corpus, can begin to learn how to perform a surprising amount of tasks without the need for explicit supervision. In English, what does that mean? GPT-2 performed better at creating news stories, poems, answering questions, language translations, and other language tasks than anyone expected. And now we take off. Now the scale issues the last panel talked about become extremely important because the interest of this goes like crazy. The research questions are the same, but the amount of data and the compute power absolutely is going on an incredibly steep curve, right? So they needed more money, and they had this funky nonprofit structure that I won't get into, but they needed incredible money. If you think about the fact they lost 540 million estimated in 2022. How do you get Microsoft and a whole bunch of companies to give you billions? You promise them a payback, period. Yeah. This gets to the notion of actual guardrails. That commercial turn, in my opinion, is a very interesting moment as we think about this in general. Right. Because the interplay, as the last session pointed out, about whether this is at a university and the talent's at undergraduate or research PhD level, the problem becomes and this is also based on 2 years inside Google. Engineers are coming from, and computer scientists, a research lab environment where when they write a paper and play with it, they don't have to worry about the worldwide scale effects. And I think my best deference to what happened at OpenAI is that mindset meant they were blind to the fact that maybe inside a lab, if you took book material and copyrighted material and it was probably fair use under US law, but maybe not 100%, but you built your model, you wrote your paper, you weren't putting all those outputs on the web. You were in a cabined area, right? You're inside this box. You wrote your papers, people tested it, you got your citations, and off you went to do your next piece of research. But once you get commercial, you can't do, in my opinion, what Sam Altman's openly admitted after the alleged claims of, oh, we're here to save humanity from ourselves. Because he said openly in New York Times, I think at some point you can't do stuff in the lab, so you need to just throw it out there and see how people are using it. And congratulations, he ended up opening the doors to possibly reversing 20 years of good law that balances the tensions between intellectual property and computer science. So there's not just them, right? There's tons of companies out here making similar mistakes when it comes to music, when it comes to other intellectual property areas, right? But as I think Dr. Seth pointed out, listen, it's the scale game. It's old school Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, it's embracing move fast and break things. And when you have revenues that are going from 1.6 annualized to 3.4 billion within a year for OpenAI, the payoffs mean you're going to run over most ethics, unfortunately, or at least they chose to. And the problem here is they're not thinking through what is actually, not to be clear, I am not against this software. And I think many of the other panel pointed out, there are tremendously good things that can come out of the broad range of what LLMs and machine learning can do. But a small tail can wag the whole dog, because the outcry from the copyright industry, the sensation of ignoring dignity because of these outputs, has given new life to extremely strong moves to try and regulate something, and probably regulate it poorly, in my sense. Right. If they had followed legal precedent, they could have avoided many of the problems, because the US legal precedent has been pretty good, thanks to the Google Books and Hockey Trust case, that you can take copyrighted material to train software. The question is your outputs. Right. And part of this is the AGI hype. Do I have a couple minutes, or do you need me to stop?
Devin, I would request you to stop now so we can bring our next speaker, and then we have time for Q&A.
Can I beg for just 1 minute of what I think would be actions? So, contrary to the current approaches, what I suggest is, one, internally a company needs to try and test outcomes, but we have to be honest that the red teaming testing will not catch every bug. Two, they should have an internal ethics review board, because that might be, if it has any teeth, a sense of someone who's not just a computer scientist says, what about this? Three, they have to have reporting systems internally so that people can say, I'm not sure about what we're doing. Four, there should be whistleblower statutes so that if someone inside the company says this is wrong, that they can actually meaningfully disclose it, because it's very hard to know what is built and how unless you're inside the company. And then perhaps a public interest cause of action, which would allow good scientists to probe software and say, hey, we found something wrong. And the analogy here is when VW cheated on its software for emissions, it was computer scientist researchers who said something looks wrong, tested it, and was able to find the problem. So my conclusion before I hand off to Emmy is, I believe better dialogue between computer scientists and those who are trying to think about society at large has to be a real meeting of the minds about what's a specific problem, and then challenging computer science, how do you fix that? And with that, I'll stop.
Thanks, Devin. I appreciate it. Clearly, you know, when we are dealing with professors and lawyers, we have to have more time on the panel.
Sorry.
Suresh, please make a note of it. It's all your fault. Thank you, Devin. Very illuminating. And we'll come back to questions after we hear from Amy. She has a presentation. Amy, are you with us?
Yes, hello.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
All right. So let me briefly introduce you to our audience today. Ms. Amy Hine, she's a research associate at Yale Digital Ethics Center, PhD candidate in Law, Science and Technology, University of Bologna, and KU Leuven. Amy is, are you based right now in US or in some other country?
Yes, I'm based in New Haven right now.
Yeah, okay. Amy researches the ethics and governance of emerging technologies, particularly AI and XR, in different geopolitical contexts. Though her original areas of interest were the US and EU, her interest in AI governance expands to the EU. Her team, Legal Alzers, were winners of the EU AI Act Grand Challenge at the University of St. Gallen. Her dissertation focuses on the human rights impacts of XR technologies. She obtained a master's degree in social science of the internet at Shirley Scholar at University of Oxford, where her thesis compared American and Chinese AI governance policies. She also has published several articles about European AI governance and Chinese and American technology policy. In her spare time, she authors the Ethical Reckoner newsletter. Amy, thanks for joining us for the first time. Floor is yours. Amy? Hello? Can you hear me?
It looks like her feed froze.
It does.
Amy, are you there? Amy, can you hear us?
She's logging back in. There we go. We're good.
So sorry, my Wi-Fi chose the perfect time to cut out.
Yeah, no problem. It happens always.
Truly. See, Jerome is currently having a moment.
We have a presentation. Jim, can you please share with us Amy's presentation?
Oh, I'm happy. I've got the slides on my computer. I'm happy to share them.
Okay, please do that. Yeah.
And then I can do the
yeah.
And then I can so how is that looking?
Looking good.
Okay. So hi everyone, thank you for that excellent introduction, and apologies for the technical difficulties. Can you still see? No, okay. Okay, there we go. And so today I'll be talking a bit about some of my research, kind of my what originally got me into the space of the ethics and governance of technology, and that's comparing AI governance in the US and China. And now I take an interdisciplinary approach to my research, trying to look at not only what's happening, but why is it happening, and what can we learn about that, especially in regards to competition and possible cooperation. And I'll be picking up, I think, on some of the threads that Dr. Fei-Ling Wang talked about this morning, where about the people and possible opportunities for cooperation. So first, I'll talk a little bit about just what's going on in AI governance landscape as a whole. We won't spend a ton of time on this, but as I'm sure many people are familiar with this, but we've got public efforts, so horizontal approach with the EU, one AI Act to rule them all. China, we'll talk more about this in depth, but very vertical sectoral regulations. And then the US, which can be generously called fragmented, many regulations at the executive federal level, but not many regulating the private sector. And then many other countries that I'm certainly not an India specialist, so I will not pretend to speak on its approach in detail, but are developing approaches that are really, I think, interesting and promising and should be looked at in more depth. Then there's also certainly private efforts with various standards organizations, the Partnership on AI, a lot of open letters, civil society action. Open letters have been, they have not abated since this tweet was tweeted. There was a big industry one recently. But then there's also some international efforts, and that's where I think the question of competition cooperation really makes itself known. So there's the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, which is working to come up with some common definitions. We've had the various AI safety summits, different AI principles. Most recently, the UN Governing AI for Humanity report, which was just released yesterday, aims to provide kind of a global opportunities for AI governance. So let's dive a little bit more into what the US is doing. So in my research, I look at 3 eras: Obama, Biden, Trump, and I look at how the themes and what each focuses on change over time. And so US AI regulation really began with the Obama era, with 3 reports released in 2016 on AI in the economy, AI in the future of work, how we can influence research and development. And it really focuses on, one of the things it really hones in on is this idea of pipeline diversity, of getting more diverse candidates into the development pipeline so that AI will be developed by more, by and for diverse communities. And this will change over the next few administrations, as we'll find out. But it also introduces these themes of maximizing innovation, relying on the free market, limiting, sort of very light touch regulation. And those we'll see really continue. And then the Trump administration came in. You kind of get the sense reading the Obama documents that they expected that a Democrat would be in the White House afterwards. That's not the case. But actually, there wasn't much action on AI from the Trump administration until about 2019. And then there was a slate of executive orders, a couple of bills, and it really was banging the drum about AI with American values. And these were never really well defined, but it was kind of a rallying cry, mostly in opposition to China. And there was a lot of emphasis on American leadership, even kind of over some of our allies, and the idea of trustworthiness, but not in the global kind of human rights-based definition, but trustworthiness as a means of increasing the use of AI. And then compared to the Obama documents, there was much less focus on ethics and responsible AI, much less focus on on diversity in the pipeline, and otherwise it was mostly just kind of full speed ahead innovation, rely on the private sector, and don't really interfere. And then the Biden administration has been kind of an interesting combination of the two, where at first you have the administration laying out its idea of a good AI society, or what a society that has AI kind of embedded through it looks like. And that was through the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And it's just really promising, community-centered and fundamental rights-based document that emphasizes diversity, not only in the pipeline, but through community consultation. So not relying on this kind of slow change of the workforce, but bringing in communities other ways. And then working with our allies, not with them as kind of second fiddle, but with them as equal partnerships through the idea of shared democratic values, which are more well-defined than American values and more inclusive, but obviously exclude China. And competition with China is one major theme that continues, that the Biden administration really ratcheted up through various chip sanctions. And then the second wave of governance actually involves some implementation. So the famous executive order on trustworthy AI came out in November, came out a year or two ago, and focuses on how do we use AI responsibly in the federal government? How do we promote its adoption in a responsible way? How do we make sure that federal agencies can use it and use it well? And then there are a few provisions in there that affect the private sector, but really not many. Mostly, it's been voluntary commitments for things like labeling and watermarking and things like that. So really, not much enforceability. So even though you've got this kind of Obama era return to ethical and responsible and trustworthy AI, you've still got the emphasis on competition and innovation. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is. when we talk about some of the kind of underlying philosophy of technology of the US and China. So then that raises the question of, well, who's next and what's next? And obviously we're in a presidential election right now. We may have a return to Trump, who promises that he would repeal the executive order and probably cut a lot of ties with China. I think that would be very bad for the US, as we saw this in Dr. Wang's lecture. A lot of the US talent pool comes from China, and so restricting talent visas would really hamstring the US talent, as well as hamper the adoption of trustworthy AI in the federal government, and also would probably hurt the US chip industry if we cut ties with China. The Harris administration has been very sort of vague on what her tech policy would be, but would likely continue the Biden themes of diversity and balancing that and innovation, and possibly being open to more regulation. So now let's look at China. China has also gone through a few waves of AI governance, and it started with the New Generation AI Governance Plan and the 3-year action plan in 2017, and these laid out high-level goals, which then provinces competed to meet through a process called fragmented authoritarianism. So in some early research, I analyzed 28 local, provincial and city level plans, and they were all issuing these insanely lofty goals of how many AI companies they wanted to attract and how much funding they wanted to provide. The question of follow through, I answered more recently. Most of these plans were not renewed. Most of the goals were not achieved. So some of them were kind of lip service, and actually some of them actually contained text copied and pasted from these national documents. But one of the reasons why a lot of these provinces weren't able to achieve their goals is because funding is highly concentrated in wealthy areas and kind of existing tech hubs. But the dominant theme that we see in these documents is the idea of cautious innovation and balancing innovation and social stability, and the idea of harmony. It pops up quite a few times in all of these documents, which I'll talk a little bit more about where that stems from. And then this idea of balance kind of continues but evolves in the era of active regulations. We've got it started with the recommendation algorithm law. Now we've got laws on deepfakes or synthetic content, generative AI, the draft facial recognition law, a possible horizontal AI Act style law. And what's interesting is you still see this idea of innovation versus stability, but it's evolving. So the generative AI law contained the draft one contained a provision that said that all generated content has to be truthful. Obviously, that's technologically impossible with the nature of these stochastic models, and that was struck from the final law. And there's actually some language saying that innovation and stability should be on equal footing, which is really unique in that document, and kind of indicative of China's perhaps fear of falling behind. We're still seeing a funding concentration. I'll show you a few charts, but I want to highlight these new AI ethics principles. There was a position paper on the global governance of AI, where China is really presenting itself as a leader in the governance of AI and calling for international collaborative AI governance. Now, some people see this as kind of as aimed at developing countries, trying to get them to kind of lean towards a more Chinese model of tech governance. But at the same time, if we take it at face value, they are indicating a willingness to work with others on AI governance. So it's potential thread for cooperation. So I'll go through these quickly, but you can see that things aren't all full speed ahead in China. So the number of projects funded by the National Science Foundation of China has gone up, but the funding is actually starting to go down. The amount, like the pool of money, is going down. So projects are competing for dwindling resources. In terms of less developed regions, the funding is going up, but it's much, much less than the overall funding. And then this is just a fun little Descartes similarity matrix. I won't go into depth because of time, but you can see the third row, that's the ethical norms for new generation AI. Those are much less similar to previous AI ethics documents from Beijing, the Beijing AI principles and the new generation AI principles, than they are to each other. And that's because this is the point where the AI ethics principles start to kind of change and become a little bit more international. They lose their kind of distinctive Chinese characteristics. So there's one example, this idea of harmony and gets turned into a more sort of human-centric verbiage, much more in line with some of principles from the OECD, so-called universal principles. So that brings me to the question, well, cooperation or competition. And there's two things that you have to look at here. One is kind of the underlying philosophy behind these two countries' approaches. So we've got so in my research, I look at kind of what are the at a million miles high, what are the philosophies that guide these, and what do they indicate about the trajectory? But I also look at, okay, well, what are the geopolitical realities? Because there's the two things that you have to balance. And so I look at the Protestant ethic and I look at Confucianism. And that's not to reduce these two countries to those philosophies, but just to look at, what are their influence and where do we see these in tech regulation? And so basic idea behind the Protestant ethic is you work really hard, you make a lot of money, that indicates your virtue. And it really was used as a form of nation building in the absence of a state religion. And it really fosters a sense of the need to work hard and a sense of American exceptionalism. And so in the US AI governance, we see that in the praise of the American worker, which persists throughout these documents, and the idea of global US leadership, sometimes in a sort of hegemonic fashion that conflicts with our obligations to our allies. It also kind of sometimes conflicts with the idea of protecting rights, because it emphasizes innovation and not sort of hands-off, light touch regulation that allows for perhaps not optimal outcomes always for the people that it claims to be dedicated to. And so I think that but I think that there's promise because, as I said, in the Trump administration, we had this emphasis on American values that was very exclusionary to our allies. And then in the Biden administration, you've got the idea of democratic values, which broadens the beneficiaries of AI to not just America, but also our democratic allies. Obviously, that still excludes China, but I think that it's a promising kind of, shows a promising willingness to work with a broader pool than before. China, Confucianism, I'm aware that oftentimes China gets reduced only to Confucianism. That's not what I am trying to do. But the fact is that China references Confucianism a lot in its foreign policy documents, and you do see its influence still in a lot of policy, especially. The basic idea is that you've got these hierarchical relationships, the ruler is obligated to preserve social stability, and there's a really important idea of harmony, or a process of harmonization. And we see that explicitly mentioned in some of the earlier AI ethics principles and even regulations. So one of the ways you can see this is this kind of emphasis on stability versus innovation, and the need to preserve social stability, because that is, basically the bargain, the deal, the contract of Confucianism. Then you also see it was a very kind of domestic-facing philosophy, because it came about essentially as a way to unify all of these warring states thousands of years ago. So very domestic-facing, but now it's evolving to be more international facing as China, grows into a world power. And so in this idea of hierarchical relationships, instead of them being purely domestic, now you have China also positioning itself as a leader for other countries to follow. And then you also have, as I said, these principles evolving to kind of lose their Chinese and Confucian character and become more international. But I do think that this is a more inherently pluralistic philosophy than the Protestant ethic. It just, Confucianism discourages conflict, even between states, without a valid cause. And so I think that the umbrella of acceptable governance strategies is wider under Confucianism than it is under the Protestant ethic. And so we see in these in the position paper on governance of AI, this very explicit call for ethical or values pluralist international global AI governance. Of course, we can't just take philosophy, at face value. There are geopolitical realities that interfere with, the kind of pure philosophical approach. So the U.S. objects to China's human rights record, especially with AI, their campaign of surveillance and detention in Xinjiang. There have been issues of espionage on both sides, the spy balloon. There's, semiconductor sanctions and a trade war happening right now. And anti-China sentiment is actually one of the things that unites the Republicans and the Democrats at the potential cost of collaboration with China, although it may get some domestic regulation passed. So to wrap up, I think both countries could ostensibly support values pluralist international AI governance, but it requires a more expansive definition of the people. So, the people, as Dr. Wang said, have no inherent conflict with each other. However, the governments are primarily looking out for their own people or for democratic people. But you can't have, when it comes to an issue like AI, a global issue, you can't limit your definition of the people to just those who share a particular political ideology or who happen to live under a particular kind of government or in a particular region of your country. It needs to be more expansive. It needs to be for the global good. And so I think that with a good venue, to bring the U.S. and China to the table, a lot of these global AI initiatives have been very high level, and I think that it brings attention to the issue, but it also puts pressure on countries to agree to these kind of largely meaningless platitudes, like, okay, we should govern AI for good, but okay, what does that mean? And we need to move from a centralized model to a more decentralized model of global AI governance, where instead of meeting only at these high level fora, we're meeting at lower level fora, at working groups, at institutions that don't have quite as many eyes on them and aren't as politically influenced, so that we can hammer out specific agreements, even if we can't agree on what does fairness mean, what does trustworthiness mean. And I think that approach could overcome some of the competitive issues and lead to true cooperation between great AI powers. So thank you all so much.
Thank
and
you.
I'm excited for the questions.
Excellent presentation, really very in-depth. And with this, we will have a Q&A here a little bit. My first question to Professor Desai is, Professor Desai?
I'm here.
Okay, great. My first question is to you, and it reads as, given the rapid adoption of numerous AI tools and technologies in the USA, they are going into mainstream. And what would be your advice or suggestions for a common person like myself that we have to keep in mind from potential violation of privacy, laws, policies, and ethics standpoint of view?
Well, I think the problem again is this is such a broad concept, right? So at one level, as the first panel, I think, suggested, you've been using AI, we all have been using AI as soon as you use autocomplete on Microsoft Word. And I think, as Emmy pointed out, the dynamic nature of these softwares make it really hard to pin down the notion of, forgive me if I get it wrong, Emmy, but I think you nailed it when you said, well, be truthful. So when you say as a consumer, what do you need to know? I mean, at one level, it's, at Georgia Tech, there's almost a joke from 10 years ago. It was machine learning is basic, and in fact, more basic and needed than calculus on our campus for computing. It's in everything. So whether one should be afraid, I'm afraid the way I was hearing your question, I don't think that's the way to look at it. I think it's, I think the privacy disclosure systems that have come up are better. If you could start to say, yeah, this too needs to say I opt out of certain data usage, which may or may not hinder these services as they gather our inputs and feed them into models, that could be interesting. But it's to your point, it is so broad that I don't have a very easy answer as to how does one identify and or avoid AI, given that it's actually the substrate of almost all software right now, or at least functionally, I feel comfortable saying that.
Right. Thank you. Suresh?
Yeah, thanks, Sunny. First of all, Devan and Emmy both, I think very, very thought-provoking presentation and sharing of your ideas and views. Loved it. And I'm sure it would lead to more stimulating Q&A. But given the limitations of time, maybe one question from the audience is, and that seems like it's more specific to Emmy. The question is, when you speak of Biden administration policies toward China, how do you view the restrictions placed on certain data flows to China by the Biden administration in February of this year? So I don't know, Emmy, if you can take that question.
Yeah, happy to. So this was an executive order that banned the transfer of genomic data over to China. And so I think it speaks to one of the really thorniest issues in US-Chinese cooperation competition, that's national security. So there's been a lot of concerns over American data ending up in China. That's one of the kind of concerns behind behind TikTok, and one of the reasons why the administration has been targeting it. And I think that that's going to be one of the hardest issues to solve globally. So in the UN Governing AI for Humanity report, they call for a global data commons, and they want basically everyone to kind of pool data sets for everyone else to use. And I was reading this and I was like, okay, great idea, increases access for lower resource countries, but there's no way that the US is going to agree to put their data sets into this pool that China can have access, and I think vice versa. And so the balancing of, and obviously countries have a right to, defend their national security. And so balancing these issues, because as other panelists have noted, AI is a dual use technology with use in defense and military applications. And so coming to agreements on, okay, well, what should be kept at the country level, what should be kept secret, what should be kept proprietary, is going to be one of the really difficult things to hammer out. And so I don't, I think that these restrictions are, fairly reasonable. I think that there have been other things targeting China that have been more kind of political grandstanding, but so it's a mixed bag is the is the nutshell.
Right. Suresh, you have a quick question?
Sure. A quick follow-up for Devan. I think Devan, when I talk to common people, workers, students, faculty, colleagues, you generally find these days almost like two camps: people who understand the productivity and the positive aspects of AI, and then you have a pool of people who are scared and literally in a different camp that we should do something about it. And I know, having worked for GE earlier on myself with large data, my earlier patents were in data analytics. I agree with you that learning has been over a period of time. It is composite over a period of time. It is there everywhere. So if you were to suggest one takeaway to our audience as to what they should keep in mind when it comes to using any AI tool or technology, so that they don't violate or step onto either the laws or ethics, or for that matter, any policies.
Wow.
What would that be?
Right at one minute before.
One, I'm going to say, I hope you really heard what Emmy was saying, because that is a heck of a request,
Right.
given the breadth of issues here. But in simplest terms, I think if you're a business, you want to be very careful about data provenance. Where did the data come from, period, is the simplest way to start, and be super careful about that. So the evolution inside business is, I think what we'll see is a lot of companies will realize, again, partially sort of trying to channel some of what Emmy's points were, the nature of data and sharing or not is going to be a big deal. There'll be a whole bunch of other regimes that come into play. So a big company like a GE could probably use LLMs internally. I predict that's what OpenAI and Anthropic and the others will actually be able to do as a type of software as service, and try and make sure that it doesn't leak over, which will have questions about how robust the model is. For individuals, I'm going to go with one thing my first year students said when ChatGPT came out. They already understood this. The problem is, if I use it, I don't know what it is and I can't understand it. And I would say be very careful, right? Critical of these outputs. Don't accept anything at face value, because it's the anthropomorphic thing, right? This is the trick. When anyone tells you it's alive and it's a great chat, you should remember it's a machine. And there's a quote from a movie that probably is not overall correct at all by today's standards, but it was a good one about an argument about, you think you're a philosopher, was one person says, and she calls him an ape. He says, oh, apes don't read philosophy. She says, yes, they do. They just don't understand it. And that's the key, is deference to the technology is, I think, the biggest mistake in any of these areas. That's the broadest advice I can say, is
I think that's a great
critical.
answer, Devin. I think that's
Yeah.
a very to the point answer in a short time. I agree with you. I think we all have propensity to fall prey to the tools and technology and start believing in it without understanding the underlying the physics of it, or the yeah. I agree.
Okay, great. I think it's time for us to wrap up this.
Jag has a question, I think.
No, I have a comment. It's the same thing we suffered when the large data computational statistical models came in, like the SAS, and there are many more, about 4 or 5 of them. Biomed was from UCLA, medical, etc. So we coined a phrase, Suresh. Geigo was the old phrase, garbage in, garbage out.
You're right. That's right.
The new phrase that I created was garbage in, gospel out, which is what Desai is talking about, that you cannot trust what comes out as reality. And you have to make sure that there are some alternate ways of counter-checking it, etc. So this is very important, because just because the computer did computational error, we thought the regression was right. And that's what I used to teach students in multivariate statistics, that unless you do hands-on things, computational errors, which is the same problem here in terms of data mining on the one hand, but also in terms of large language models. Ani, I have one comment about Amy's comment. One of the reasons why genome is a battleground between US and China is because genome is such an important technology for health sciences. And Chinese are really investing AI technology in healthcare. They have an aging population, large population. They want to figure out how diseases happen, what to do about that one. It's a very large scale, and genome is a good tool, which America would prefer not to share.
Right. Well, I think in wake of time, I want to thank everybody, Dr. Sheth, Amy, Professor Desai, Suresh, and my colleague from Georgia Tech Cyber, James Hoadley, who has been helping us in putting this session, streamline this session on Zoom. We have recorded this, and a copy of, edited copy of this today's program would be available in about 10 to 12 business days. I would like to also announce that our next program is an in-person reception and award ceremony for celebrating UIB's 15th anniversary, as well as 30th anniversary of Georgia Tech Global Business Forum. It will be held in Historic Academy of Medicine from 5 to 8 p.m. on November 20th. Please mark it on your calendar. You will get some invitations and information. And with this, I would like to thank everybody who made this unique program possible, and we will have a follow-up in probably in 2025. Thank you, and have a nice weekend. Signing out.